Get comfortable. Settle the pillow. Let your shoulders come down, and let the room be as dark as it wants to be. Tonight, we are going a long way back, to a particular field on a particular hillside, in the last week of August, 1871, England, the chalk country of Wiltshire, where the land rolls in long, pale curves, and the wheat stands waist-high, and the sky is very wide indeed. You already have a picture of this. Almost everyone does. It arrives before you ask for it, because it has been painted and printed and hung on schoolroom walls for 150 years. In that picture, the light is gold, always late afternoon. There is a wagon piled impossibly high with sheaves, and a horse with brasses on its harness, standing patient in the shafts. Men in clean white smocks lean on their tools with their hats pushed back. A woman in an apron carries a jug. Somebody is singing. Children ride on top of the load, and everybody is smiling, and the whole scene has the warm, slightly sleepy quality of a memory rather than a day of work. That picture is not exactly a lie. Wagons were piled high. Children did ride on the loads. There was singing, and there was beer, and there was, at the end of it all, a supper in a barn with candles and long tables. Every element of the picture existed. What the picture leaves out is the arithmetic, and the hours, and the weather, and the fear. Because here is the thing about harvest that the paintings never manage to show you. It is a race. It is 4 or 5 weeks in which a crop that has taken 11 months to grow must be cut, bound, stood up to dry, carried in, and built into ricks before the weather turns. And the weather in an English August does not care what anyone has invested. Rain on standing wheat is inconvenient. Rain on cut wheat lying in the field is expensive. Rain on cut wheat that goes on for a week, so that the grain begins to sprout inside the ear while it is still in the sheaf, is a disaster that reaches all the way down from the man who owns the land to the woman who will be buying flour in January. So the days are not gold and slow. They are long, and they start before light, and they finish after it. 12 hours in the field is an ordinary day. 16 is not unusual when the weather is threatening and the moon is decent. The men who cut are moving in a rhythm they cannot break without losing money, because they are not paid by the hour, but by the acre. The women who follow them bend and gather and bind and stand up again, perhaps 1,000 times a day, perhaps more. The children carry water and food and sheaves and each other. Nobody in that field is having a picturesque afternoon. Everybody in that field is working against a calendar and a barometer. And here is the part that matters most, the part that turns this from a story about farming into a story about a household. For a family of laboring people in the south of England in 1871, harvest is the single most important financial event of the year. Not Christmas, not the hiring fair. Harvest. It is the 1 month in 12 when a family can earn ahead of what it owes. The rest of the year, the wages of a farm laborer in these counties are so tightly matched to the cost of bread and rent and firing that there is nothing left over at all, and often rather less than nothing, which is why so many cottages carry a standing debt at the village shop that never quite clears. Harvest is the month when that debt can be pushed back. Harvest is boots for the children and cloth for winter, and a little put by against the weeks in February when there is no field work at all and the days are 5 hours short, which is why nobody stops, which is why a woman with an infant at home walks out at 3:30 in the morning, which is why the fear of rain sits in the chest of everyone in that field like a held breath, and why they will glance west at the horizon, perhaps 200 times in a day, without ever quite meaning to. That is the harvest we are going to spend tonight inside, not the painting, the month. Before we begin, one small thing, and I will keep it short because nobody comes here for announcements. If you find these long, slow histories useful for getting to sleep, do subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel keep making them. And if you are still awake at the end, which most people are not, leave a comment telling me where in the world you are and what time it is where you lie. I read them in the mornings, and they are the strangest and most pleasant map of anywhere. 2 in the morning in Ohio, 10:30 in Melbourne, somebody on a night shift in a hospital in Manchester with one earphone in. Right, that is all of that. Let me tell you what we are actually going to do, so you can stop holding on to it and let it happen. We are going to spend one day in one field, from the dark before 4 in the morning until the light goes and rather past it. You are going to be a woman of 34, with 3 living children and a husband who works the horses on a home farm, and you are going to work that day from beginning to end. And as we go, whenever we come to something that needs explaining, we are going to stop and explain it properly. What an acre of wheat actually paid to cut. Why a woman's rate was fixed lower than a man's regardless of what she got through. Why sheaves are stood in shocks and left standing for days rather than carried straight in. What a rick is worth, and why the man who builds it is a specialist, paid accordingly. What gleaning was and how old it was, and how it was quietly narrowing in exactly these years. What the harvest home supper in the barn was actually for, from the point of view of the man who paid for it. None of this requires you to remember any of it. That is rather the point of the format. If you drift off in the middle of a wage calculation, the wage calculation will not mind. But I want to plant one idea before we go down into the dark, because it is the idea underneath everything else tonight. And if it lodges anywhere, it may as well lodge now, while you are still following. The great fiction about agricultural England in the 19th century is that it was static, that there was a village and a squire and a church and fields, and that this arrangement had simply always been there and would go on being there, and that the people in it were part of the landscape in the way that the hedges were. It is a comforting fiction, and it was very deliberately maintained in paintings and in poems and in sermons and, as we shall see, in the seating plan of a harvest supper. The truth in 1871 is that this world is coming apart, and everybody in it can feel it. The railways have been running for a generation, and they have made it possible for a young man to be in a Birmingham factory by Tuesday. Grain is beginning to arrive from America in quantities that will, within a few years, break English wheat prices altogether. Emigration agents are working the southern counties with printed handbills about Canada and Queensland and free passages. And in this exact year, in Warwickshire, a hedge cutter and Methodist preacher is about to start organizing farm laborers into a union, and within 12 months there will be men on strike in villages that have not seen an argument about wages in living memory. So the field we are walking into is not eternal, it is late. The people cutting that wheat include men who will not be in that parish in 5 years, and children who will spend their adult lives in towns their grandparents never saw. When somebody in the shade of the hedge at noon says that so-and-so's boy has gone to the works at Swindon, he is not gossiping. He is describing the end of a world in the only terms available to him, which are the terms of who has gone and who is left. Hold that lightly. Let it go if you like. Now let the room go soft. Let the pillow take the weight of your head properly, and let your jaw unclench, because it probably is clenched. It is the 28th of August, 1871, and it is not yet 4 in the morning, and it is completely dark. You are lying on a mattress stuffed with chaff, which is the outer husks of last year's grain, in the upper room of a 2-room cottage on the edge of a chalk down in North Wiltshire. The room smells of the clothes you wore yesterday, which are hanging over the end of the bed and have not dried, and of the thatch above your head, and faintly of the ash in the grate downstairs. There is no glass in the little window at the gable end, only a shutter, and the shutter is open because the night is warm. Somewhere out beyond the garden, a cockerel has already made a first attempt and given up. You have been awake for about 4 minutes. You have not moved yet. And then, from the direction of the farmyard, 3/4 of a mile off across the fields, comes the sound that decides everything about the next 16 hours. The estate bell. It is not a large bell, and it is not rung with any ceremony. Somebody in the yard, usually the foreman, occasionally the bailiff himself if he has slept badly, takes the rope by the granary door and pulls it perhaps a dozen times, and the sound comes across the stubble and the hedges thin and flat, the way sound carries over open chalk before the air has warmed. It is not a beautiful sound, it is a working sound, but you have lived within earshot of it for 11 years, and your body responds to it before your mind has caught up, and by the time the last stroke has died away, you are already sitting up with your feet on the boards. So, before you go down those stairs, let us establish where you actually are and who you actually are, because the whole of the next month depends on it. The year is 1871. The place is North Wiltshire, on the chalk, about 7 miles from the nearest market town, and rather further from anywhere you would call a city. The estate you live on runs to roughly 2,000 acres, which in this county makes it substantial but not enormous. There are neighbours with 4 times that, and a great many small owners with a fraction. It is not a famous estate. Nobody has painted it. It appears in the county directory in 3 lines. Of those 2,000 acres, a little over 500 are farmed directly by the estate itself. This is the home farm, and it is where your husband works and where you will be working today. The remainder is let out to tenant farmers, 6 of them, holding between 80 and 400 acres each, paying rent twice a year and running their own businesses on their own judgment within the limits of their leases. At the top of this arrangement sits the landowner. He is resident, which matters more than it sounds. An absentee owner is a name on a rent receipt. A resident owner is a man on a horse who might appear at the edge of your field at any hour of any day, and whose opinion of you is transmitted downward through every level of the estate. He is in his 50s. He was a magistrate for some years. He owns the cottage you are standing up in. Below him is the agent, who handles the money, the leases, the timber, the repairs, and who you have spoken to perhaps 4 times in your life. Below the agent on the home farm is the bailiff. The bailiff is the man whose decisions actually shape your day. He decides which field is cut first. He decides who is taken on for harvest and who is turned away. He decides, this morning, where you stand and what you do. He earns something in the region of £80 a year, with a house, which places him a long way above you and a long way below the agent, and he is entirely aware of both distances at all times. Below the bailiff are the regular men of the home farm. Your husband is one of them. He is a carter. This is worth pausing on, because it is the difference between your household and several others along the lane. A carter has charge of horses, in his case, a team of 4 heavy horses, plus a spare, and horses are the most valuable moving property on the farm. A man who is trusted with them is a man who has demonstrated, over years, that he is reliable, sober enough, and up before anyone else, because horses must be fed and groomed and harnessed before the day's work can begin at all. In practice, this means your husband's day starts a full hour before the rest of the field, every day of the year, including Sundays, because animals do not observe the Sabbath. For this, he is paid 12 shillings a week. Let that figure sit for a moment, because everything else in this cottage is built on it. 12 shillings. In the northern counties, where the mills and the mines are competing for the same men, an agricultural labourer might be getting 15 or 16. In parts of Dorset and Wiltshire in these years, the ordinary field man is on 9 or 10 and thinks 11 is doing well. 12 shillings, with the carter's responsibility attached, is a respectable wage for this county and this decade, and it is not enough. Out of that 12 shillings, the rent for this cottage is 1 shilling and 6pence a week, and it is not handed over. It is deducted before he ever sees the money. The cottage belongs to the estate and is held with the job, which is the arrangement that governs your entire life. If your husband is dismissed or injured badly enough that he cannot manage the horses, or if he quarrels with the bailiff in a way that cannot be repaired, you do not merely lose the wage, you lose the roof, and you lose it within a week or a fortnight, depending on the temper of the man deciding. Every labouring family in a tied cottage understands this arithmetic, and it explains a great deal of the deference that outsiders mistake for contentment. So, 10 shillings and 6pence in hand in an ordinary week. Against that, flour. This is the largest single item, and it dominates everything. A gallon loaf, that is the standard 8-pound loaf a labouring family measured its life by, has been running around 9pence to a shilling in these years, moving with the price of wheat. A household of 5 gets through several of them a week. Call it 4 shillings on bread alone, in a bad price year rather more. Then a little bacon, mostly for your husband, because there is a general and quite deliberate understanding in cottages like this one that the man who does the heaviest work gets the meat. Then tea, which is a genuine luxury and used very thin. Then sugar, then soap and candles and thread, then coal, if you can get it, or wood, if you have the right to gather it. You do not save. The idea is not really available. What you do instead is manage a moving balance of small debts, a running score at the village shop, settled partly when there is money and never entirely, a few shillings owed to the shoemaker, something owed for the child's boots. This is not fecklessness. It is the only mechanism by which a household on 10 and 6pence can absorb a wet fortnight, or a fever, or a pair of feet that have grown. Which brings us to why you are awake at 4 in the morning in the last week of August. For 4 or 5 weeks of the year, the money changes shape entirely. During harvest, your husband will earn not 12 shillings a week, but something closer to double, and possibly more, depending on how the work is taken and how the weather runs. On top of that, you will earn, not as an addition to his wage, and not calculated as part of it, separately, in your own name, at a rate set for women, which we will come to. Your 2 elder children will earn something as well, small sums, but sums. and at the end of it there will be one settling day when it is all counted out on a table, and what is on that table has to be looked at not as money, but as a decision about the winter. Boots. That is usually the first thing said out loud. Boots for the two eldest, which cost more than anyone who has not bought them expects. Then cloth, or a made petticoat, or a coat turned and relined for another year. Then something against the shop score. Then, if the harvest has been very good and the weather very kind, perhaps a small sum kept back, which will not survive till Christmas. That is what this month is. Not a festival, a window. Now, the room. 2 rooms is the actual description, though it flatters the arrangement. Downstairs is the living room, which contains the hearth, the table, 3 chairs and a stool, a shelf, a settle, and the door to the garden. Upstairs, reached by a ladder stair in the corner that is closer to a ladder than a stair, is this room, where you and your husband sleep, and where a partition of boards separates off the space in which the 3 children sleep together. Downstairs the floor is beaten earth, with a few bricks near the hearth. Up here it is boards, and you can hear through them, and they can hear through them, and everybody has long since stopped thinking of this as remarkable. You are 34 years old. You were born 5 miles from here, and you have been to the county town twice. You married at 23, which is late by the standards of the older women and normal for your own generation. You have had 5 children. 3 are living, a girl of 11, a boy of 8, and a girl of 3. The other 2 are in the churchyard, and this is not a fact that carries any special weight in this cottage, or in any of the cottages along the lane, because it is the ordinary shape of a family here, and everyone you know has the same shape. It is simply part of the arithmetic of who is in the room. Your eldest girl already works. Your boy will be in the field today. Your 3-year-old will go along the lane to a neighbor, which we will get to. And your hands, which you are looking at now in the dark, without being able to see them, are the hands of a woman who has been binding sheaves every August since she was 9 years old. 2 things happened yesterday evening, and together they are the reason for the bell. The first is that the bailiff walked the top field in the late afternoon, took a head of wheat in his hand, rubbed it, bit a grain, and said one word to your husband as he came past with the horses. The word was Monday, and then he changed his mind and said tomorrow. The second is that the barometer in the farmhouse hall, which the bailiff consults with the seriousness other men reserve for scripture, has been falling steadily since noon. The wheat is ready. The weather is turning. There are perhaps 30 acres standing on the top field, and every one of them has to come down and be bound and be stood up to dry, and it has to begin now, in the dark, before the sun has any thought of appearing over the down. Downstairs, the fire is not lit. That is your first job, and you have about 90 seconds before your husband is on the stairs. Before the fire, though, there is something to say about what this month is, because almost everything that gets remembered about harvest gets the purpose of it wrong. The picture that survives is of a celebration, a festival, a community coming together in gold light to bring in the fruits of the earth, with a supper at the end of it, and a great deal of singing. And there is a supper, and there is singing, and we will get to both of them in their proper place. But the supper is at the end, and it lasts one evening, and the month that comes before it is not a celebration in any sense that the word usually carries. Here is the plain version. For a family in this cottage, on this estate, in this year, the harvest is the only period in the 12 months when it is possible to earn ahead of what you owe. Not to earn a great deal, not to become comfortable, to earn ahead, to finish a month with money that is not already spoken for by rent and bread and the shop, and to convert that money into things that will still exist in February: boots, cloth, a pig, if the year has been very good, coal laid in, the doctor's club paid up, the score at the village shop cleared back down to nothing, or as near nothing as it ever gets. Every other month of the year, the arithmetic of this household runs level at best and slightly downhill at worst. Your husband's regular wage covers the food and the rent and very little else, and any unusual expense, a pair of boots for the boy, a funeral, a week of illness that stops the wage, comes out of the shop's credit and sits there as a debt that never quite goes away. That is the ordinary condition. It is not a sign that anything has gone wrong. It is how the year is built. And then for 4 or 5 weeks in late summer, the arithmetic changes, because for 4 or 5 weeks, the farm needs more hands than it has, and it needs them urgently, and urgency is the only thing that has ever moved a laboring wage upward in this county. That is the thesis of the whole month, and you may as well have it now while the room is dark. Harvest is not the reward for the year's work. Harvest is the year's wages, compressed. The mechanism that does the compressing is piecework. For most of the year, your husband is paid by the day, or rather by the week, at a rate fixed by what other farms in the district are paying and adjusted only rarely. It does not matter how much he does. A man who works quickly and a man who works slowly are paid the same, which is one of the reasons that the pace of ordinary farm work in February is not what a stranger would call urgent. In harvest, that arrangement is set aside. The cutting of the corn is let out by the acre. A company of men agrees with the bailiff or the farmer on a price for so many acres, cut and bound, and stood up in shocks, and that price is theirs to divide when the work is passed as done. If they work 16 hours a day and finish in 9 days what might have taken 14, the money is the same money, and they have it sooner and can go on to the next farm. If they are slow, or if the crop is heavy and tangled, and the going is harder than they judged, they have bargained badly, and they carry it. So the pace changes completely, and it changes because the men have made it change, and this is one of the very few places in the agricultural year where a laborer holds a piece of genuine bargaining power in his hand. Everyone on both sides of the bargain knows the wheat will not wait. Everyone knows what a week of rain would do. That knowledge sits on the table between the bailiff and the men when the price is agreed, and both sides pretend it is not there. Additional hands come in for the month because 30 acres on the top field is only the beginning, and there are hundreds of acres on this estate. Men from the villages who work at other trades the rest of the year, men down from the towns, Irish reapers who have crossed for the season and will follow the ripening north and west as the weeks go on, all of them absorbed into the fields for as long as the corn lasts, and all of them gone again by Michaelmas. And women. Women are paid too, and paid separately, and paid at their own rate, which is a matter we will have to come back to more than once, because it is not a small thing, and it does not get better as the century goes on. You will be in that field from before dawn until the light fails. You will bind sheaves at a speed that a man who has not done it cannot match. Your rate is fixed lower, and it is fixed lower not because of the quantity of work you do, but because of what you are. That is the whole of the reasoning, and nobody in the field will feel any need to defend it, because to them it is not a rule about you. It is simply what a woman's day is worth. Now, why 4 weeks? Why does the entire economic weight of a family's year come to rest on such a short span? Think of the farming calendar as a wheel with one very heavy spoke. The autumn is ploughing and sowing, and it is steady work at a steady wage. Winter is threshing in the barn, hedging, ditching, muck carting, and the days are short and the wages are at their lowest of the year, and in a bad winter there is not enough work to go round, and men stand idle. Spring brings the sowing of the spring corn, and the beginning of the root crops, and lambing before that, and the wages lift a little, because there is more to do. Early summer is hoeing and haymaking is the smaller cousin of harvest. A busy fortnight, with a little extra money in it, and the same anxiety about weather in a lesser key. And then everything the farm has been doing since the previous October comes due at once. Wheat, barley, oats, they do not ripen on a schedule of anyone's choosing, and they will not hold their condition once they are ready. Wheat cut too green will not fill properly and will not keep. Wheat left standing too long will shed its grain onto the ground at the first strong wind or at the first stroke of the hook, and every grain on the ground is money on the ground. There is a window, and depending on the season and the variety and the ground it stands on, that window is somewhere between a few days and a fortnight for any given field. The farm's answer is to stagger it. Barley here, wheat there, oats on the poorer ground, sown at different times so they come ready at different times, so that the whole harvest does not need to be cut in the same 7 days. But the stagger only works so well. The weather that ripens one field ripens the next. A hot fortnight in early August will bring everything on together and turn a manageable month into a scramble. So the corn of an entire estate, the whole return on a year of ploughing and sowing and weeding, and the rent that the tenant farmers have to find, comes down to a handful of weeks in which everything must be cut, bound, dried, carried, and built into ricks. Which brings us to the barometer in the farmhouse hall. Cut wheat is more vulnerable than standing wheat. That is the fact underneath all of it. Standing corn sheds water, the stems carry it down, and the heads dry in the wind. A sheaf lying flat on stubble in the rain is a sponge. Even a sheaf stood up properly in a shock, 6 or 8 or 10 of them, leaned together with their heads up and a gap for the air, will only shed so much before the wet gets into the middle. If it stays wet, the grain begins to sprout in the ear. It swells, it splits, it puts out a small white root, and it stops being wheat that a miller will buy for bread and becomes wheat that goes for stock feed at a fraction of the price, or does not go at all. A rick built with damp sheaves heats from the inside, and a rick that heats badly is spoiled through the middle, and a rick that heats very badly can set itself alight without a spark from anywhere, which is a thing we will come to when we stand in the rickyard. So the difference between a good year and a bad one is not chiefly the size of the crop, it is the weather in the fortnight after it is cut. And that difference reaches down through every level of this estate in a straight line. A ruined harvest is a poor return for the landowner, a hard quarter's rent for the tenant, a farmer looking to cut his winter men down to the bone, and, at the bottom of the line, a family in a cottage on the lane, finding that the 4 weeks they were counting on have paid 2/3 of what they should, and that the boots will have to wait, and that the shop score will not be cleared this year either. That is what the falling glass in the farmhouse hall means. That is why the bell rang before 4. The floor is cold under your feet. You are dressing in the dark by the shape of things rather than the sight of them, and you dress for the field which is not the same as dressing for the village. Stockings first, thick ones. Wool, because you will be walking through stubble all day, and stubble is a field of small, blunt spikes that will find any gap. Your oldest skirt, the brown one, shortened at the hem so it does not drag and catch. A stout apron over it, coarse, which is not for tidiness, but because you will be pushing bundles of cut wheat against your body 1,000 times before dark, and the straw would go through anything finer in a morning. Sleeves down and buttoned at the wrist. A shawl for now, which will come off by 7 and be left under the hedge. A bonnet, wide, because there is no shade in a wheat field, and the sun will be on the back of your neck for 11 hours. And the pads of cloth for the inside of your palms, cut from something already past mending, which you tie on last of all. The fire is the first thing, and the fire is never quite dead. You banked it last night with ash raked over the embers, which is a small skill in itself, done in the last minute before sleep, and the whole of this morning depends on whether you did it well. You crouch and pull the ash aside with the poker, and there is a dull orange eye in there, no bigger than a thumbnail. You feed it dry straw first, then a handful of furze, then the thin split wood that lives in the corner by the hearth and is never allowed to run out. It takes. The room comes into being around the light of it, and it is a small room, and there is not much in it to see. A table, 2 stools, and a bench. The kettle on its hook, a shelf with the plates standing on edge, and a tin box for the tea. Your bread crock in the corner with a cloth over it. Above the fire, hanging from a nail driven into the beam, a bunch of dried herbs that was once put there for a reason and is now mostly there because that nail has a bunch of herbs on it. The kettle goes on, water from the bucket, which was filled last night from the well at the top of the lane, 40 paces up and 40 back, because water is not a thing that arrives in this house. It is a thing you carry. In an ordinary week you carry perhaps 8 or 10 bucketfuls a day for washing, cooking, and the copper. In harvest week you carry more, because everything that goes into that field has to be drunk, and everything that comes out of it has to be washed. While the kettle heats, you cut bread. This is the real work of the hour before 4, and it is worth slowing down for, because the food that leaves this cottage this morning is the whole of what 4 people will eat between now and something like 9 tonight. There is no going home at midday. The field is 1.5 miles away up the down, and nobody walks 3 miles in the heat of the day to eat. So what you carry is what there is. So, bread first, and there is a great deal of it. A quartern loaf is the standard, about 4 pounds of it, baked in the village oven on Friday, and you cut most of one now in thick slabs. Bread is the base of everything a labouring family eats in this county, in this decade. Bread and cheese, bread and bacon, bread and onion, bread and a smear of dripping, bread and nothing much at all. In a bad month, bread is not the accompaniment to the meal, it is the meal, and the rest is seasoning. Cheese next, and yours is hard and pale and sharp, sold by weight at the shop, at something like 7p the pound. You cut a wedge and wrap it in a cloth, and you cut it thinner than you would like. Bacon, if there is bacon, and this year there is a little. The pig was killed at Christmas, and hung and salted, and has been eked out since, and what is left is the last of the flitch, dark and very salt, and you cut 4 small pieces of it. Cold bacon is a harvest luxury, and it is not lost on you that you are packing it, because a man cutting wheat by the acre needs it more than he needs it in February. The bacon goes where the work is. That is the household arithmetic, and everyone in the house understands it without it ever being discussed. An onion, 2 hard-boiled eggs from the 3 hens at the back, which is the whole of what those hens have produced in 2 days. And then the drink, which is the part of this that will decide whether you are still working at 4 in the afternoon. Here is something that is easy to misunderstand about harvest, seen from a distance. The work is not chiefly limited by strength. It is limited by heat and by water. On an open chalk field in the last days of August, cutting and binding from first light, a working body will lose a very great deal of fluid, and the only question that matters is whether you can put it back in fast enough to keep going, which is why the drink is not an afterthought in the basket. It is the largest and heaviest thing in it. Your husband carries a wooden harvest bottle, and it deserves a moment. It is a small barrel, really, made of oak staves and iron hoops, flattened on one side, so it lies against the hip and does not roll away when you set it in the stubble. It holds about 1 gallon. It has a wooden bung and a leather strap, and it belonged to his father. Wood is used rather than glass or tin for a plain reason, which is that wood does not shatter when it is dropped in a field and does not become too hot to hold when it sits in the sun. A wet cloth wrapped round it and laid in the shade of a shock will keep the contents cool most of the morning. What goes into it this year is cold tea. Weak tea, made last night, sweetened with a little sugar and gone quite cold. In many fields on many farms, the bottle would hold small beer, the thin harvest beer that the farmer provides by custom, and there will be beer in this field too, brought out by the cart. But you have learned that the beer does not do for you what the tea does, and the tea costs nothing beyond the leaves you have already bought. And there is an argument in the village about all of this that has been running for years and will come to your ear again before this day is out. You fill the smaller bottle too, the stone one, for the children. The basket is a flat oval of split willow with 2 handles, and everything goes in it in the same order it has gone in every harvest of your married life. Cloth on the bottom, bread, cheese and bacon wrapped separately, so the salt does not go through everything. The eggs at the side where they will not be sat on. A knife, a tin mug, a second cloth over the top, damped because it keeps the flies off and it keeps the bread from going to brick in the heat. You put in the little pot of goose grease as well, which is for hands, and you will want it by 9. The kettle is boiling. You make tea, hot this time, and it is stewed and strong, and it is the whole of breakfast for you and for your husband. That and a heel of yesterday's bread, eaten standing up. Nobody sits down. Sitting down at 10 minutes to 4 in the morning is a thing you do once and regret for the whole of the day. Your husband comes in from the back with the smell of the stable already on him because he has been up longer than you have. He is a carter, and horses eat and are fed before people are, and he has had 4 of them out and given them their corn and looked at the shoe on the near side leader that he did not like the sound of yesterday. He drinks his tea in 3 swallows. He says the glass is still falling. He says it the way a man says a thing he has already decided not to say twice. Now the children. The eldest is 11, and she is coming to the field, and she has been awake since the fire was lit, and is already at the table with her boots on. She will glean at the end of the day, and before that she will fetch and carry and mind the youngest, and she will not be paid a wage of her own, because she is your daughter, and her labor is part of the household's labor, and that is simply how the account is kept. The middle one is 6, He is coming too. A 6-year-old in a harvest field is not decoration and is not a burden if he is managed. He carries the small bottle. He runs it up and down the line to whoever calls for it. He picks up the ears that fall loose from the sheaves and drops them in a bag hung round his neck. And by dark, that bag will hold enough grain to matter, which is the first economic fact he will ever learn, and he will learn it thoroughly. He is asleep in the chair, with one boot on, and you put the other one on him without waking him properly, and he walks out of this house in a state that is not really waking at all. The youngest is 2, and she stays. You carry her, still wrapped, up 2 doors to the widow at the end who is past fieldwork now, and who takes 3 of the lane's small children through harvest for a few pence and a share of what comes home. You hand her over in the dark at the door. She does not wake. The widow says the same thing she says every morning of harvest, which is that the glass is falling, and you say that you know. Outside, the lane is emptying. That is the part that would surprise you if you came to it new. It is not yet 4 o'clock, and the whole row is awake and moving, doors opening one after another down the length of the lane, low voices, a dog put out and told to be quiet, the scrape of hobnails on flint. 11 cottages, and there is a light in 9 of them. Somebody's baby is crying, and somebody's husband is looking for a whetstone he put down last night and will not find. The blacksmith's boy goes past at a run because he has been sent somewhere already. There is no bird song yet. That comes later, and it comes suddenly, and you will notice it because for about 20 minutes it is the loudest thing on the down. Your husband takes the bottle and the fagging hook. You take the basket on your arm and your daughter's hand in your other hand, and your daughter has her brother by the collar of his smock, steering him because he is walking with his eyes shut. You go up the lane, past the well, past the last cottage, through the gate at the top that has not shut properly since the spring, and out onto the track that runs up the shoulder of the down. It is cold. Your breath shows. The east is not light yet, but it is a different sort of dark from the west, thinner, the way water is thinner than milk, and against it you can see the black line of the top field's hedge and the shapes of people already walking towards it. The top field lies on a slope that faces east and south, which is why it was sown to wheat and why it ripens first. And when you come through the gap in the hedge, you can see the whole of it at once. 22 acres of standing corn going grey in the last of the dark. It does not look gold. That is the first correction of the morning. Ripe wheat at 4 in the morning, before the sun is on it, is the colour of old rope, and it stands very still, and the only sound is a dry, small rustling near the ground where the mice are. The bailiff is already at the top corner, with a lantern hooked on the gate post, and there are perhaps 30 people gathered in the lee of the hedge, which is more than the estate keeps in a normal week, and more than the village can supply on its own. He does not make a speech. He tells the company of men that they are taking the field by the acre, as agreed, which they knew, and he tells them where he wants the first cut opened, which is at the eastern headland, so that they work with the light rather than into it. He says the word rain once, and does not enlarge on it. Then he tells the women and the boys where they are to fall in behind, and that is the whole of it. And the lantern comes off the gate post, and the morning begins. Your husband goes forward with the cutters. You do not. This is worth understanding properly, because the division that happens in that first 5 minutes in the half-dark is the same division that will decide, 4 weeks from now, what is in your hand at the settling. The men cut. The women and the older children gather and bind. There is no law that says so, and no farmer in Wiltshire has ever had to explain it. And if you asked one, he would tell you that the hook is a man's tool and leave it there. Women did cut, in some counties, in some years when hands were short. But in this field, on this morning, the line that goes forward into the standing wheat is a line of men, and you are behind them. The first cut is opened by hand along the headland to make room for the rest, and then the company forms up. They do not go across the field in a straight rank. They go in echelon, which means a staggered diagonal, each man set back and to the left of the man ahead of him, so that nobody is cutting into another man's swathe and nobody is putting his hook where another man's arm is. Seen from the gate, it looks like a flight of birds. Seen from where you are, 10 yards behind, it looks like a slow machine. 5 men, and then a gap, and then 4 more, each of them bent at the same angle, each of them moving in the same 3-part motion, and once they have the rhythm, you can hear it before you can see it, a sound like somebody tearing sheets a long way off, over and over, in time. Here is what they are actually holding, because the word sickle covers about 4 different tools and gets most of them wrong. The small-toothed sickle, the one in the pictures, is a reaping tool worked with one hand while the other hand gathers a handful of straw and pulls it taut. It cuts low, and it cuts clean, and it wastes almost nothing, and it is slow, and by 1871 it has mostly gone out of use in this part of the country, except among older men who will not change, and among gleaners' families cutting a strip of their own. What most of the men in this field are using is a fagging hook, which is a heavier blade with a smooth edge and a longer handle, swung two-handed or swung one-handed with a hooked stick in the other hand to pull the corn against the blade. It is not really reaping, it is closer to chopping. It leaves a higher stubble, 6 or 8 inches of it, which matters to you because that is what your knees and your forearms will be in all day. It is perhaps a third faster than the sickle, and a third faster over 22 acres is a day and a half, and a day and a half in late August is the difference between a rick and a ruin. The scythe, the long one, the one with 2 handles on a curved snath, is used here too, but on the barley and the oats rather than the wheat, and there is an argument about that which the older men enjoy having. A scythe is faster than anything else a man can carry. It also throws the cut corn down in a tangle, and it shakes the ears, and wheat that is fully ripe sheds its grain when you shake it. Barley does not mind. Wheat minds a great deal. So the wheat gets the hook, and the men take longer, and the farmer pays for the longer, and nobody in the field thinks this is anything other than obvious. The blades will not stay sharp. That is the other thing the pictures leave out. Every man has a rubstone with him, a flat piece of gritstone about the length of a hand, carried in a leather sheath at the belt or pushed into the top of a boot, and every 10 or 15 minutes he stops, stands up straight, and puts an edge back on. It takes 20 seconds. It happens all day. Along the line the stones go at different times, so there is never a moment in the whole morning when you cannot hear at least one of them somewhere, that quick ringing scrape, and by the end of the week you stop hearing it at all, in the way you stop hearing a clock. A good rubstone costs a few pence and lasts a season. A hook costs perhaps 2 shillings and 6pence and lasts years if it is not left out in the wet. Men own their own. They do not lend them. Behind the cutters, you begin. The corn comes down in loose armfuls and lies where it falls, and the work is to gather it, tie it, and stand it clear so that the ground behind the line is empty for the wagons. You take up an armful against your hip, and you take up a second, and you judge the size of it, and the judgment is the skill. Too small a sheaf, and you have made twice the work for everyone who handles it afterwards, and there will be twice as many to lift, and twice as many to stand, and twice as many to pitch onto the wagon. Too large, and it will not dry through the middle, and it will sag, and it will fall out of the shock in the first wind, and a man on a load will curse whoever tied it, and he will be right. Then you make the band. There is no string. Nobody buys string for this. You take a double handful of the longest straw, hold the two lots head to head, give them a half twist so the ears lock into each other, and you have a rope about a yard long made out of the crop itself. You lay it on the ground, roll the sheaf onto it, bring the two ends round, twist them together tight against the sheaf with a turn of both wrists, and tuck the twisted end back under the band. 6 seconds if you are quick. It holds until somebody wants it not to hold, and then one pull opens it. You will make perhaps 800 of those today. You have been making them since you were 9. Nobody has ever taught you this in the way anything is taught. You learned it in a field behind your mother, and you learned the size of a sheaf by having yours pulled apart and retied in front of you until it stopped happening, and that is the whole of your training, and there is no record anywhere in the estate's books that you possess it. The book will say the field was cut. It will not say by whose hands, or how well the bands held on the journey to the rickyard. The first hour is the best hour, and everyone in the field knows it. The light comes up while you are working, and you do not see it arrive so much as notice, at some point, that you can see the color of the straw again, and that the hedge has gone from black to green, and that the men's shirts ahead of you have turned from gray to white. The birds start, all at once, the whole down at the same moment, and for a while it is genuinely loud. The dew is still on everything. The straw is damp, and it lies quiet, and it ties easily, and the air is cold enough that the work is a pleasure, and your hands are not yet sore. None of that lasts. By the time the sun is properly clear, the straw will have dried and gone brittle, and it will scratch instead of bending, and the bands will want to spring open, and the dust will start coming off the ears, and the thistles that have grown up through the crop and been cut with it will find you. Your forearms are already going pink from the stubble. Some of the women wear sleeves of coarse linen tied over their arms from wrist to elbow, and by 9 o'clock you will wish you had bothered. The pace is not yours to set. That is the thing to understand about working behind a company of men taking a field by the acre. They are not paid by the day. They are paid for the 22 acres, and every hour they save is money in their own pockets. And so the line ahead of you will go all day at a speed a man cannot quite hold, and it will not slow for you. And if you fall behind the cut corn, simply lies there, accumulating on the ground, until somebody says something. So you keep up. You bend, gather, twist, tie, stand, and go on, and your back finds an angle it can live at, and stays there, and you learn within 20 minutes not to straighten up unnecessarily, because straightening costs more than it saves. Ahead of you the hooks go on tearing at the wheat, and the stones go on ringing along the line, and the field, which at 4 in the morning was one solid standing thing, has begun to have an edge. That edge moves. By 7 in the morning, it has crossed perhaps a third of the field, and the standing wheat, which looked like a single object, now looks like something being eaten from one side. At a little past 7, the line stops. Nobody announces it. The man at the head of the company, the one who set the rhythm and who will settle the money at the end, simply comes to the end of his swathe, straightens, and rests the hook against his leg, and the rest come to the end of theirs and do the same, and the ringing of the rubstones fills the gap where the cutting was. This is the first stop of the day. It will last about a quarter of an hour. There is a stone bottle passed along, and men sit on the shocks that were made in the last hour, and one of them takes his boot off and shakes it out. You do not sit immediately. You are behind, and there is loose corn lying in the swathe that needs gathering before the line starts again, and if you leave it, you will be gathering it at midday when it is worse. So you work through the first 5 minutes of the rest, and then you sit at the hedge with the other women and drink, and the cold tea tastes of the bottle. While the field is quiet, look at what is actually being counted here, because the money in this field is arranged in a way that is worth slowing down for. The wheat on the top field is 22 acres. Before a single hook touched it, the farmer and the head man of the company agreed a price for the whole of it. Not a wage, a price. So much an acre to cut it, bind it, and set it up in shocks, all found, the work to be finished before a stated day, and the money paid when the field is cleared. That is what taking a field by the acre means, and it is the ordinary way that corn was got in on farms of this size across the south of England in the 1870s. The figure varies with the crop and the county and the year, and it varies most of all with how the wheat is standing. Clean, upright wheat on a dry chalk field, which is what this is, might be taken at something around 10 or 11 shillings the acre. Wheat that has been beaten flat by a storm, lying tangled in every direction so that the hook has to be worked under it and lifted, will not be touched for less than 15 or 16, and in a bad year, men have asked and been given £1 the acre for it, and the farmer has paid because the alternative is to leave it standing. Take 10 shillings and sixpence for this field, 22 acres. That is £11 and 11 shillings for the whole job, agreed in a farmyard in the 3rd week of August by 2 men who both know exactly what the other is thinking. Now divide it. There are 6 men in the company, not equally though. The head man takes a slightly larger share, because he negotiated, because he sets the pace, because he answers for the work if the farmer is dissatisfied, and because if a man drops out sick, he must find another. Say he takes a share and a quarter, and the rest take 1 share each. That is £11 and 11 shillings, split into 6 1/4 parts, which comes to a little over £1 16 shillings a share, and something near £2 6 shillings for the head man. Set that against what your husband earns in an ordinary week, 11 shillings, and the cottage rent taken out of it before it reaches his hand. A man in this company, if he and his 5 companions can clear the top field in 8 working days, has earned more than 3 ordinary weeks' wages in a week and a bit. That is the whole reason for the speed you are trying to keep up with. That is why the line ahead of you does not slow. And it explains something that is easy to misread from a distance, which is why harvest laborers worked hours that look impossible. 12 hours is a short harvest day, 14 is normal. In a settled spell with a falling barometer, men have cut from 3 in the morning until 9 at night with 2 stops. They are not doing it because a farmer is standing over them with a watch. There is no farmer standing over them at all. The bailiff came out at 4:30, looked at the edge of the cut, said nothing to anybody, and rode off to the barley on the lower ground. The men are driving themselves, because every hour saved is a share of £11 11 shillings, arriving sooner and with fewer days of their own life spent earning it. There is a limit to that logic, and everybody in this field knows where it is. Cut too fast, and you cut badly. Sheaves tied loose come apart on the wagon. Shocks built carelessly fall over in the first wind, and the wheat lies on wet ground and sprouts, and the farmer walks the field before he pays. He is entitled to hold back money for bad work, and it is done, and it is remembered on both sides for years. So the pace is fast, but it is not careless, and the headman watches the work of his own company more closely than the farmer ever will, because a docked field docks him too. Now the part of this that concerns you directly, which is that none of the £11 11 shillings is yours. You are not in the company. Women are not, on this estate, taken into the reaping companies that price a field by the acre. You are hired separately, by the day, to bind and gather behind the cutters and to help with the shocking, and you are paid at a woman's rate, and the woman's rate here in harvest is 1 shilling a day, sometimes 1 and 3pence in a pressed year when hands are short, against the 2 shillings or 2 and 6pence a day that a man not in a company would be paid for general harvest work. Notice what that rate is not connected to. It is not connected to the amount you bind. 2 women working the same field at very different speeds are paid identically. There is no arrangement by which a quick binder earns more than a slow one. The rate is attached to the category of person, not to the work done, and it was defended at the time on the grounds that women's work was lighter, which anybody who has spent a day bent over a swathe with a straw band, cutting into the web of the thumb, would find an interesting proposition. The children are cheaper again. A boy of 9 or 10, leading a horse or carrying the drink, might get 4pence or 6pence a day and his food. It is not nothing. 6pence a day for 4 weeks is 14 shillings, and 14 shillings buys boots. Add the family up then, because that is the unit that actually matters here, and it is the unit that the household reckons in. Your husband, in the company, might clear something near £2 across the whole of the harvest month, if the weather holds and the fields come one after another. You, at a shilling a day, 6 days a week for 4 weeks, earn 24 shillings. Your eldest, at 6pence, earns 12. That is something like £3 16 shillings brought into a 2-room cottage in a month, in a year where the whole family income in an ordinary week is 11 shillings less rent. Which is why harvest is not a festival. It is the month that decides whether there are boots in January. And it is why a wet August is not an inconvenience. If rain comes down for 10 days in the middle of this, and the corn goes flat and sprouts in the shock, the company's price gets renegotiated upward for the difficulty, but the days of work are lost, the fields come late, the money arrives thinner and later, and the shop score that has been running since spring does not get cleared. Farmers in a wet year lost the value of the crop. Laboring families in a wet year lost the only weeks of the year in which they could earn ahead of what they owed. Both were serious. Only one of them was recorded in the agricultural press. There is a whistle from the head of the line, or not a whistle exactly, more a word thrown backward down the field, and the quarter of an hour is finished. The men get up off the shocks, with the particular reluctance of people who know that sitting down was a mistake. You stand, and your back tells you what it thinks of the last 3 hours. The sun has come clear of the hedge on the eastern side now, properly clear, and the whole field has changed colour in the time it took to drink half a bottle of cold tea. The grey has gone out of the wheat. It is yellow-white and it glares, and the shocks throw short, hard shadows across the stubble. and the air over the standing corn has begun to shimmer very slightly at the far end of the field. By 8, it will be hot. By 11, it will be the kind of heat that makes the flies impossible and the chaff stick to wet skin. And the straw, which at 5 in the morning bent obligingly around your fingers, is drying out by the minute and will fight you the rest of the day. The hooks go back into the wheat. The stones start ringing again along the line. You take up the swathe where you left it, make a band, lay it, gather, twist, tie, stand it aside, and go on. By 9 in the morning, the field has begun to take on its second shape. The first shape was the standing wheat, a solid block of it running away uphill to the top hedge, unbroken except where the hooks have bitten in along one edge. That shape is going now, retreating a few yards at a time, and behind it a different arrangement is being built, and the building of it is largely your work and the work of the other women and the older children. A sheaf on the ground is worth very little. It lies flat, it holds the dew, it takes up damp from the stubble underneath it, and if it lies more than a few hours in that condition, the grain at the center begins to warm. So the sheaves must be stood up, and stood up in a particular way, and this is called shocking here, though 8 miles east of you they say stooking, and 40 miles north they say hattocking, and the men who come down from the towns for the month use whatever word they learned first, and get laughed at for it either way. You take a sheaf in each hand, one arm through the band on each side, and you carry them a few steps to where the ground is clear. Then you bring them together at the head, ears against ears, and set the butts apart, and press down slightly so the cut ends bed into the stubble. If you have done it correctly, the 2 sheaves hold each other up. If you have done it carelessly, they lean, and then they slide, and then they are flat on the ground again, and you have to come back for them. You learned the trick of it when you were 7 years old, and you have not thought about it consciously in 20 years. Then 2 more against those, and 2 more, until there are 8 or 10 sheaves standing in a double row with a passage of air running through the middle. The rows are set to run north and south. This is not superstition. It is so the sun can get at both sides of the shock in the course of the day, morning on one flank and afternoon on the other, and so the prevailing wind can go straight down the aisle rather than pushing the whole thing over sideways. Here is something that surprises people who have never worked in corn. The wheat is not ready when it is cut. Cutting it is barely half the business. Grain taken directly from a standing crop still carries a good deal of moisture, both in the straw and in the ear, and if it goes into a rick in that condition, it will heat, not metaphorically. A badly made rick of damp corn generates real warmth in its interior, enough to spoil the grain, discolor the straw, and in the worst cases, enough to become a genuine danger to the yard. So the sheaves stand out in the field for anything between 4 days and a fortnight, depending on the weather and the crop, and they dry in the wind while the men move on and cut the next portion, and only then are they carried. There is a saying about it that everybody in this parish knows, and everybody repeats every single August, as though it were fresh. Wheat should hear 3 church bells before it is carried, 3 Sundays in the field. Nobody actually waits 3 Sundays if the weather is fine and the barometer is steady, because nobody can afford to, but the saying survives because it points at something true, which is that patience in the field is not idleness. It is the difference between grain that keeps and grain that does not. Barley is different again, and is usually mown rather than reaped, and left loose in the swathe rather than bound, and turned over with rakes to dry. Oats are the most obliging of the three. Wheat is the valuable one and the fussy one, and this is the wheat field, and so everything is done with a slightly higher order of care than it would be for the other two. At about 9:30, there are horses on the headland. You do not look up straight away. Nobody does. But the whole line becomes aware of it within a few seconds, the way a room becomes aware of a change in the weather outside, and the tempo of the work alters very slightly. Not faster exactly, neater. 3 men on the headland. The first you know very well, because he is the bailiff, and he was here at 4 in the morning, and he has been up and down this field a dozen times since, allotting work, judging the crop, deciding where the wagons will come in. He is a farm servant, like your husband is a farm servant, only he is paid by the year rather than the week, and he has a house with 4 rooms rather than 2, and he can read a ledger and cast up an account. He came out of a cottage like yours. Everyone knows exactly which cottage. This is the whole of his authority, and also the whole of his difficulty. The second is the tenant of this farm, who holds 900 acres of the estate on a lease, who employs the men, who takes the profit and carries the risk, who will be ruined by 3 wet Augusts in a row, and made comfortable by 3 dry ones. He is not gentry. He is not a labourer. He is the thing in between, that the census is always slightly unsure how to describe, and he is more anxious about this field than anyone standing in it, because the rent falls due at Michaelmas regardless. The third rides slightly apart from the other 2, on a better horse, and he is the landowner, and he owns the ground under your feet, and the cottage your children are asleep in, and the church you were married in, and the lane you walked down at 4 this morning. Watch what happens in the next 30 seconds, because it is the whole social order performed in miniature, and it takes almost no time at all. The bailiff speaks to the tenant with a degree of familiarity, because they work together daily, and both know the state of every field on the farm. The tenant speaks to the landowner with a careful, easy respect, the manner of a man who is a guest at the house perhaps twice a year and would like to be asked again. The landowner says something to the tenant, and both of them laugh, and it is impossible to tell from 30 yards whether the remark was actually amusing. And you and every other woman and man in the line do the same thing at the same moment, without any discussion having taken place. The men who have caps take them off or touch them. You straighten from the sheaf you are handling, and you do not stop working, exactly, but you become visibly a person who is working well. Nobody speaks. Nobody is spoken to. The landowner looks at the field, which is what he came to look at, and the horses turn on the headland and go back down toward the lane, and after perhaps a minute and a half, the line has resumed its ordinary rhythm, and somebody at the far end says something that makes 4 people laugh. He was not unkind. He is not a cruel man, and nobody in the parish thinks he is. He gives beef at Christmas and coal to the old people, and he paid for the new roof on the school. That is precisely the arrangement. The land produces, the estate distributes a portion of what it produces as generosity rather than as wage, and everyone understands both halves of that sentence perfectly well, while agreeing never to say the second half out loud. There are more people in this field than live in your lane. That is the other thing about harvest. The regular men of this farm number perhaps 14. Today, there are close to 40 pairs of hands here, and they have come from 3 directions. Some are village people who are not farm servants the rest of the year. The shoemaker's family, the woman who takes in washing, the blacksmith's 2 grown sons. In August, they come into the corn like everyone else, because the money is there for 4 weeks and nowhere else in the calendar. Some have come out from the town, 10 or 12 miles, and are sleeping in a barn on the far side of the farm. Bricklayers, labourers mostly, out of work in the building trade, and they are strong and willing and slow, and the regular men are patient with them in a way that is not quite kind. And a company of 8 or 9 have come from Ireland, as men from Ireland have come to this county every harvest for longer than anybody here can remember. They walked from the coast. They take the corn by the acre. They work at a speed that the local men grumble about and privately measure themselves against. And they will go on eastward when this farm is finished, and be in Essex by the middle of September. The village's opinion of them is a contradiction that nobody bothers to resolve. They are spoken of as outsiders, and they are also the reason this field will be down before the weather turns, and both of those facts are stated in the same conversation without anybody noticing the difficulty. Your hands have taken on the state they will be in for the rest of the month. The straw bands cut, not deeply, but continually, in a fine web of lines across the pads below the fingers, and there is a shine to the skin there now that will become a callus by the end of next week and will be gone by Christmas. The insides of your forearms are scratched from wrist to elbow. There are thistles through the crop on this part of the field, in among the wheat where the hoeing missed them in the spring, and their heads come up in the sheaves and go straight through the sleeve. You do not stop to look at any of it. You take the next 2 sheaves, 1 in each arm. You carry them 4 steps. You bring the ears together and set the butts apart, and you press down until you feel them bed and hold. The sun stands over the field without shadow, and the work stops. There is no whistle and no bell. The bailiff simply straightens from the hedge where he has been standing with his stick, and says something to the nearest of the cutters, and the man passes it along, and within a minute the whole line of the reaping has come apart. Hooks are laid down, with the edges turned inward, and the handles set where a foot will not find them. The men walk out of the standing corn towards the northern hedge, which is the only hedge on this field tall enough to throw shade at midday, and they walk slowly, because after 8 hours of stooping, nobody walks any other way. You come out of the stubble with your arms full of nothing, for the first time since first light, and the lightness of them is strange. Your shoulders keep the shape of the carrying. You find where you left the basket in the morning, in the ditch under the blackthorn, with a sack thrown over it against the sun, and the ground there is cool through the cloth of your skirt when you sit. 50 or 60 people arrange themselves along 100 yards of hedge, and they arrange themselves in a pattern that nobody has to be told. Families together, the Irish company at the far end, in their own group, with their own food, close enough that a remark can travel, and far enough that it does not have to. The single young men of the village, in a knot of their own, loud. The bailiff, neither with the labourers nor apart from them, but sitting on the gate, half turned, where he can see the whole line of them, and the field as well. The tenant farmer has gone back to the house for his dinner, and will return at 2. Nobody comments on that either. Your husband comes across from the wagons with the chaff still on his shoulders, and sits down heavily beside you, and your youngest, who has been carrying water all morning, and has taken this to mean that she is now employed, sits down in the exact center of the group, as though she has earned the position, which, in a way, she has. What you brought out at 3:30 this morning is what you eat now. Bread, most of a quartern loaf, baked the day before yesterday, and going firm, cut thick and cut here in the field, so that nothing dries. Cheese, hard and dry, and cut thin, because cheese is money, and it goes further thin. A piece of cold, fat bacon, not much, cut into 4, so that each of you has something with a taste to it. An onion, raw, which sounds like nothing, and is in fact the best part of the meal, and which you divide with the small knife your husband keeps in his pocket for a dozen other purposes, and in the bottom of the basket, wrapped in a cloth to keep it from the bread, 6 cold boiled potatoes from last night's pot, which you eat in the hand like apples with salt from a screw of paper. That is the harvest dinner. It is more than you would eat on an ordinary day in June, and it is not much for a body that has been swinging and lifting since 4 in the morning. This is one of the quiet facts of harvest that the pictures never carry. The food improves in August because the work demands it, and it still does not meet the demand, and people finish the month thinner than they began it, while being better fed than at any other time of the year. The drink is the farm's business, not yours. Out from the yard at midday comes the cart with the barrels on it, and the boy driving it is 9 years old and takes the responsibility with enormous seriousness, and behind him in the cart are 2 casks of small beer and a wooden tub of cold tea for those who will not take the beer. The cans go along the hedge. Your own harvest bottle, the little wooden one on the cord that has been lying in the ditch under the sack since dawn, is filled from the cask and stoppered and set back in the shade, and that bottle is what will get you through the afternoon. Slow down here, because the beer is not a detail, it is a line in the farm's accounts, and it is an argument that has been running in this county for 30 years. The beer given out in a harvest field is not the beer of a public house. It is small beer, brewed weak on purpose, somewhere between 1 part in 50 and 1 part in 30 of alcohol, brewed at the farm or bought in by the barrel, and it exists because a laborer in a hot field must drink something, and the something cannot be water. The water available to this farm is a pond, a shallow well by the yard, and a stream that runs past 2 cottages and a pigsty before it reaches here. Nobody on this field has read a word about the germ theory of disease, which is at this date still an argument among educated men rather than a settled fact. But everybody on this field knows, without being able to explain it, that a man who drinks freely from the pond in August will be ill by the weekend, and a man who drinks small beer will not. The brewing has boiled the water. That is the whole of it, and none of them know that is the whole of it. The custom is that the farmer provides it, and provides it without limit during harvest, and the amount is not small. A working man in a harvest field will take somewhere between 4 and 8 pints of small beer in a day, and there are 60 people on this field, and the harvest runs a month. Farm accounts of this period show harvest beer costing a middling farm somewhere between 15 and 40 pounds in a season, which is to say, the price of a good horse, spent on drink, poured into a field. And by 1871, there is a body of respectable opinion that has decided this must stop. The argument comes from the temperance societies, from a good many clergymen, and from a certain kind of improving landowner, and it runs like this. Drink is the ruin of the laboring class. The harvest allowance accustoms men, and worse in the eyes of these writers, women and boys, to taking beer in quantity as an ordinary part of the working day. The custom of the largesse, where a company of harvesters is given money at the end and spends it in the village on the same night, is worse still. Therefore, the honest and the humane course is to abolish the beer and pay its value in wages instead, and let the man take the money home to his wife. The counter-argument comes from the farmers and from the labourers themselves, and it is not the argument the temperance writers expect. The farmers say that beer paid in beer is drunk in the field, and beer paid in money is drunk in the village, and that a man who has had his 4 pints in the sun and gone home has done less harm than a man with 2 shillings and an evening. The labourers say something more direct, which is that the allowance is worth more to them than the money offered in its place, that a farm which stops the beer is a farm which has quietly cut the harvest rate, and that they will go to the farm which still gives it. There are farms in this county that have gone dry, and there are farms in this county that have gone dry and quietly gone wet again the following August, because the men who take the corn by the acre would not come. You have an opinion on it, and it is not the opinion of any of the pamphlets. You think that a farm which pays its beer in money has found a way to be praised in the newspaper for something that costs it nothing, and you would rather have the cask. The talk along the hedge goes where it always goes. It goes to prices first. What wheat is making at Devizes Market, which everybody discusses as though it were their own money, and which is in fact the farmer's money entirely, except that everybody understands the connection between what the corn makes and what a man is offered in November. Then it goes to Michaelmas, which is at the end of September, which is when the hirings are settled, and when a family whose cottage goes with the job finds out whether it still has the cottage. Then it goes, as it goes every August now, to who is leaving. 2 brothers from the far end of the village went to Swindon in the spring, to the railway works, and the wages there are talked about along this hedge in tones somewhere between disbelief and grievance. A family you know went to Canada last year on an assisted passage, and there has been 1 letter. The union men have been about the county this summer, holding meetings in the evenings, and the older labourers speak of them cautiously, because a man who is known for a union man is a man whose cottage may be wanted for somebody else at Michaelmas. All of that conversation happens in about 20 minutes, without heat, between mouthfuls, and it is the same conversation being had in 100 fields across the south of England this same afternoon. Then the bailiff gets down off the gate. There is no announcement. He gets down, and he walks out into the stubble, and men begin to stand. The whole rest has taken perhaps 40 minutes, and you have eaten, drunk, said what you had to say, and lain flat on your back on the ditch bank for 8 or 9 minutes, with your forearms across your eyes, and that lying down is the single most valuable thing that has happened to your body since dawn. The hours that come now are the worst of the day, and everybody knows it. The heat has settled into the standing corn. The dust of the cutting hangs in it. The stubble is hot enough to feel through the boot. Between 1 o'clock and 4, the work does not get faster, and it does not get slower, because it cannot get slower, because the rate is by the acre, and the barometer is falling, and the discipline of the afternoon is simply the discipline of not stopping. You do not straighten up to look at how much is left. You do not count sheaves. You take the 2 nearest, you carry, you set the butts, you press, you turn, and the field comes towards you a yard at a time. Somewhere past 3, the sound of the field changes, and you hear it before you see it. Under the hiss of the hooks and the rustle of the sheaves comes a lower noise, a slow grinding of iron on flint, and the chink of harness. The wagon has come up from the bottom gate, and your husband is walking at the head of the near horse, with his hand on the cheek strap, bringing them round in a long curve, so that the load will be built along the line of the shocks, and not across it. You know the horses better than you know most of the people in the village. There are 2 of them, both of them bays, both of them of the heavy sort, bred for this country, and the older one has worked this same field every August for 11 years. She does not need leading. She needs somebody to walk beside her so that she knows the work has a person attached to it. That is nearly all the boy is doing at her head. The boy of about 11 who has been hired for the month at £1 a day and who will spend 8 hours today walking a distance he cannot calculate and standing still in the sun while other men load above him. Carting is not the same work as cutting, and it is not paid the same way. A carter is a made man in the small world of the farm. He is on regular weekly wages rather than piece rates. He has the care of animals worth more than his cottage and everything in it, and he answers to the bailiff for the condition of harness that costs, new, something close to a year of his own earnings. In the ordinary run of the year, that standing is worth a little more in respect than in money. In harvest, it is worth a great deal, because the whole month turns on whether the cut corn gets off the ground before the weather comes, and the men who move it are the ones who decide how fast that happens. The loading takes 3 people and a rhythm. One man stands in the stubble with a long 2-teamed pitchfork and puts the sheaves up. Another stands on the wagon and takes them and lays them. The boy holds the horses and moves them forward when the man on the load calls for it. 6 feet, 8 feet, a wagon length. Your husband takes the pitching for the first load and then goes up onto the wagon for the second, because he is one of the 3 men on this farm who can properly build a load, and building a load is the part of this that is genuinely difficult. Here is what a load actually is. The wagon bed is perhaps 11 feet long, with a ladder frame extending it fore and aft, and a good harvest load rises well above the height of a man standing on the ground, sometimes to twice that. Nothing holds it together but the way the sheaves are laid. The man on the load works from the outside in. He sets the butt ends outward and the ears inward, so that every course locks the one beneath it, and the whole thing draws itself tight under its own weight. He keeps the middle full and slightly higher than the sides, because a load that sags in the center will spread and come apart. He binds the corners by laying the outermost sheaves of each course across the ones below at an angle, like the courses of a brick wall, so that the vertical joints never run through. And he does all of this walking about on the surface of the thing he is building, with no fixed footing, receiving a sheaf of 8 or 10 pounds every 6 or 7 seconds from below. A load built badly does not fall over in the field. It falls over in the lane, on the camber, on the corner by the pond, and when it does, 2 men will spend an hour and a half picking corn out of a ditch, and the whole chain behind it stops, and every one of those minutes is a minute nearer the rain. That is why it is worth having a man who can do it, and why the difference between a carter and a laborer is not a matter of strength. The rope goes over the top at the end, front pole to back pole, hauled down and hitched off, and then your husband slides down the side of the load with his heels in the sheaves. He walks to the horses' heads. The boy stands back. The wagon takes the weight in a lurch, and the wheels turn out of the ruts, and it goes away down the field towards the gate at a walking pace, tall and gold and slightly swaying, and it is the single image from all of this that painters have loved for 200 years, and it is also about 1.5 tons of somebody's winter moving at 2.5 miles an hour. The corn does not go to a barn. There is not a barn on this estate large enough to hold a fraction of what will be cut this month, and so it goes to the rickyard beside the home farm buildings, where it will be stacked and thatched and left standing until it is threshed out over the winter and into the spring. You have not seen the rickyard today, but you have seen it every August of your life, and it is worth understanding what happens there, because it is where the work of this field turns into the thing that can actually be sold. The ricks are built on staddles. A staddle is a squat mushroom of shaped stone, a pillar with a broad flat cap, and there will be a dozen or more of them set out in a rectangle with a timber frame laid across the tops. The whole rick is built on that frame, standing 3 feet clear of the ground. The reason is rats. A rat can climb the pillar, but it cannot get round the overhang of the cap, and a rick that sits directly on the earth will lose a quantity of grain over a winter that is easily worth more than the stone. The rick builder is a specialist, and on a farm of this size, he is often the same man every year, sometimes brought in from outside for the season. He works from the middle outward and keeps his center high, exactly as the man on the wagon does, and for exactly the same reason, so that every sheaf slopes butt outward, and any water that gets in runs away from the heart of the stack rather than into it. He walks the courses as they rise. 2 men pitch to him from the wagon, and a third receives and passes. By the time a rick is finished, it may stand 20 feet to the ridge and contain the produce of 8 or 10 acres, and it will settle by a foot or more in the weeks afterwards as the weight compresses the straw beneath. Then it is thatched, not thatched as a cottage roof is thatched, but thatched quickly, with straw laid on the pitched top, and combed down and held with spars, and a light rope netting, or in some counties with lengths of twisted straw rope pegged at the eaves. A thatcher can cover a rick in a day. Until it is covered, the whole thing is at risk from a single wet night, because rain that soaks into the top of an unthatched stack will not dry out, and the wet works downward, and by December, the top 3 feet of that rick is a hot, blackened, useless mass, and the smell of it will tell you before you climb up. Consider what is standing in that yard by the middle of September. 6 or 7 ricks, each of them holding the wheat of perhaps 10 acres, and each acre yielding somewhere near 4 quarters of grain. At the prices of this year, that is something in the region of £250 to the rick. Set against a labourer's regular wage of 11 shillings a week, 1 rick is about 9 years of a man's earnings, standing in the open air, made of dry straw, unlocked, 100 yards from the cottages. Which is why nobody smokes in the rickyard, and why everybody in the parish knows it, and why the loudest and most immediate fear on any farm in August is not weather, but fire. A rickyard alight cannot be saved. Straw burns hot and fast, and throws sparks onto the next stack, and the parish fire engine, if there is one, is a hand-pumped cart 4 miles away that will arrive in time to wet the ashes. Farms of this size take out insurance against it, and the plate of the insurance office is fixed to the wall of the barn where it can be seen, and the premium is one of the few farm costs that everybody in the village can name. Out in the field, none of that is visible. What is visible is the empty wagon coming back up the lane for the 3rd time, and the way the shocks have thinned out across the near half of the ground, and the fact that the light has begun to do the thing it does in the last hour, coming in low under the hedge and lying flat along the stubble so that every stone and every fallen ear throws a shadow twice its own length. The dust is the part nobody paints. Cut wheat carries a fine chaff that comes off it in a cloud every time a sheaf is lifted, and after 10 hours it is in your hair and your collar and the creases of your neck and along the top of your forearms where the sweat has held it. It is in your throat. Everybody is coughing a little by 5 o'clock, a short, dry cough that means nothing except that it is August. When your husband walks past you at the head of the horses, His eyebrows are pale with it, and his forearms are pale with it, and there is a clean line at his wrists where the cuff has been. He looks at you. You look at the light. Neither of you says anything, because you are both making the same calculation, which is how much of this field can be carried before the dark. The answer is that most of it can. The last load goes up the lane at 8:15, with 2 of the boys riding on top of it, and the field that stood full and gold at 4 this morning is now stubble and shadow, with 3 shocks left standing at the far end, because the wagon could not take them, and they will keep until tomorrow. But before that, at the very end of the cutting a few days ago, there was the last swathe, and that is worth going back for, because it is the one part of the harvest that has come down to us almost entirely as picture and almost not at all as fact. On this estate, the last piece of standing corn in a field is cut with a certain amount of noise, not ceremony exactly. Nobody has planned it. What happens is that as the standing wheat narrows, the men close in on it from 3 sides, and the pace picks up without anyone calling for it, and there is shouting, and somebody's hat comes off, and the last dozen square yards go down in a rush, with 4 hooks working at once. Then a woman binds the last sheaf, and it is set up on its own, and someone ties a knot of poppies or a twist of straw round it, and it rides home on the top of the last load. In some parishes, it is dressed as a figure and kept in the house until the next harvest. In this one, that is remembered rather than done. The older women describe it. The younger ones have not seen it. What survives here is the shouting and the poppies and the fact that the last sheaf goes up on the load rather than into the rick with the rest. You should be careful about how much weight you put on that. The books written about country custom in this decade tend to collect the survivals and set them out in a row, and the effect is to make a village sound as though it lives inside a folk calendar. It does not. It lives inside a wage. The last sheaf takes about 90 seconds. The wage takes a month. What follows the last sheaf is the thing that matters to you, and it is not a custom at all in the sense of being decorative. It is the gleaning. Here is the rule, and it is enforced as strictly on this estate as any rule about trespass. No gleaner sets foot on a field until the last sheaf has been carried off it. Not the last sheaf cut, the last sheaf carried. While a single shock is standing, that field belongs to the farmer, and everything in it belongs to the farmer, and a woman found in it with a sack is not gleaning, she is stealing. Once the ground is clear, the field is open, and whatever is lying on it is free to whoever picks it up. The signal for that, in this parish and in a great many others across the south, is a bell. The church bell is rung at a fixed hour in the morning, usually about 8, and no one enters the fields before it. It is rung again in the evening, usually about 7, and everybody comes off. The sexton is paid a small sum by the parish for ringing it through the season. The purpose is not mystical. It is to stop 40 women and 80 children racing each other onto the ground at 4 in the morning, and to make sure that the woman who lives nearest the gate does not get the whole of the near end before the woman who lives 2 miles off has finished feeding her family. It is a rule for keeping the peace among people who are all, at that moment, competing for the same fallen grain. So on the morning after this field is cleared, you will be at the gate before 8 with the 2 older children, and 30 or 40 other women will be there with theirs, and the bell will go, and you will walk in. Consider what you are actually gathering. A reaping hook does not cut clean. A binder does not bind everything her hands close on. A wagon shakes on ruts. Between the standing crop and the rick, somewhere between 2 and 5 bushels an acre goes on the ground, sometimes more if the crop was laid by rain or if the men were driven and careless. On 20 acres, that is a very considerable quantity of wheat lying loose in the stubble, and the farmer is not going to send men over the ground to pick up ears one at a time, because no wage would make that worth doing. It is worth doing for you, because your labor is already there and costs him nothing and costs you only the hours. The method is slow. You work bent or on your knees, moving along the line of the old swathe where the losses concentrate, and you gather the ears into your left hand until the handful is full, and then you tie the handful with a straw and drop it into the sack or onto the cloth. Children are better at it than adults for the first 2 hours, and worse for the last 4. A 6-year-old can be set to the gaps between shock stands, which is where the loose ears sit, and told to bring everything to you. An 11-year-old works nearly as fast as a woman. A steady woman with 2 children working with her on a well-lost field in a good year can bring home something in the neighborhood of a bushel a day, say 2 or 3 weeks of gleaning across the parish as the fields come clear one after another. Say 6, 8, 10 bushels of wheat in the sack by the end of September. Take that to the mill, and it comes back as flour, less the miller's toll, which he takes in kind. 10 bushels of wheat will feed a family of 5 with bread for something like 3 months of the winter, on a wage of 11 or 12 shillings a week, with bread at the price it has been running. That is not a supplement. That is the difference between buying bread out of the wage all winter and not buying it. It is very close in value to the whole of what your husband earns in a month, which is why it is your work, and why it is understood as your work. Gleaning is done by women and by children and by the old, and it is one of the few things in the whole economy of this village that a woman controls from beginning to end. The grain she picks up is hers. Nobody advances it to her. Nobody deducts rent from it. Nobody enters it in a book against her name. No farmer counts it, and no bailiff signs for it. It goes into a sack, and the sack goes to the mill, and the flour goes on the shelf. There is no wage rate for it, and there is no employer in it. In a life where almost every shilling that reaches your hands has passed through somebody else's first, that is unusual enough to be worth naming. And here is the part that people assume wrongly. Everybody in the village will tell you that gleaning is a right. Older people will tell you it is a right older than the parish church, and some of them will tell you it is in Scripture, and they will name the passage. What it actually is, in law, is nothing at all. There was a case, decided in the courts before any of us were born, in the 1780s, which put the question directly and answered it directly. A woman had gleaned on a field, the farmer sued, and the court held that there is no legal right of gleaning in England. The grain on the ground belongs to the owner of the crop. If he permits gleaners, that is his permission, and he may withdraw it. If he forbids them, they have no case. The custom stands on nothing but consent. That judgment did not stop gleaning. Consent held over most of the country for most of the next century, because the farmers who withdrew it found themselves living among neighbors who would remember. But it changed what gleaning was. It made it a favor that looks like a right, which is a particular and uncomfortable thing to depend on, and every woman with a sack in a stubble field knows it, even if she would not put it that way. And in these years, it is narrowing, where the fields have been enclosed and thrown together into large holdings. The man who decides is no longer a farmer who drinks in the same taproom, but a tenant with 2,000 acres and a bailiff. Where the new reaping machines have come in, and on the big farms of the eastern counties, they are coming in fast. The losses on the ground are smaller, and the gleaning is worth less. Where the farmer keeps sheep, he may turn them onto the stubble the moment it is clear and let them have what is lying there, because a bushel of loose wheat is worth more to him inside a ewe than inside your sack. That last one is happening more every year, and it is entirely lawful, and it is the quietest way in the world to end a custom without ever forbidding it. On this estate, the permission still holds. The landowner regards it as one of the things a landowner permits, and the bell is still rung, and nobody proposes to stop it. But it is permitted. That is the whole of its standing. So you are in the stubble on the morning after, with the sun still low and the ground cold under your knees, and the field looks entirely empty and is not. Your youngest is somewhere behind you, with a handful of ears held out in front of him, like something breakable, because he has been told they matter, and he has taken it seriously. The older girl is working the line ahead of you, and has already learned to keep her back straight and to gather the handful before she stands, because standing up and bending down is what wears a person out, not the picking. The sack against the gatepost is filling slowly. You can see the level in it when you carry an armful over, and it has come up perhaps 4 inches since the bell. Around you across 20 acres, 30 other women are bent in the same posture, moving very slowly, in more or less the same direction, and nobody is talking much, and the only sounds are the rooks in the elms and the sound of straw being tied. A week later, the last field is carried. It is not the top field, which came in first and is already ricked and thatched. It is the awkward one, down by the brook, 12 acres of barley on ground that lies wet and dries late, and it has been left to the end every year as long as anyone can remember. The final load goes out of it on a Thursday afternoon in the 2nd week of September, and there is a green branch tied to the front of the wagon, and one of the carter's boys is sitting up on top of the load with his legs hanging over, which he would be shouted at for on any other day of the year. The supper is that Saturday, in the great barn on the home farm. The barn is emptied for it, or rather the part nearest the doors is emptied, since the far end is already stacked to the tie beams with the barley that came in first, and there is nowhere else for it to go. Somebody has swept the threshing floor. Somebody has hung lanterns from the crossbeams on wire, and there is a smell in the place that is barn smell and lamp oil together, dust and straw and burning paraffin, and under that, the smell of meat that has been cooking somewhere else since morning and has been carried down the hill in covered dishes. The tables are boards on trestles. There are 3 of them, running the length of the floor, and this is worth looking at for a moment, because where the boards are placed and who sits along them is a map of the estate drawn in men and women and benches, and everybody walking through the doors reads it without needing to be told a thing. At the top, nearest the far end where a fire has been laid in a brazier, there is a shorter table set crossways. The landowner sits at it, and his wife, and the parson, and the 2 principal tenant farmers, and the farm bailiff, who sits at the end of that table and is the hinge of the entire arrangement. He is the only man in the barn who is at home at both ends of it. Below him the long boards begin, and along them sit the carters first, because a carter who handles 4 horses and builds a load is the aristocracy of the labouring men, and everyone accepts it, and then the shepherds, and then the regular day men, and then, further down, the men who were taken on only for the harvest month, and then the women, and then the children wherever there is room, which is mostly on the ends and on upturned boxes. You are seated about 2/3 of the way down, on the north side, with your husband beside you, because a carter's wife sits with her husband, which is not a rule anyone has written, and is a rule all the same. 3 places along, the women who came from the village to bind and glean, and who have no man on the payroll, are sitting together in their own group, and they will be served after you, and they know they will be served after you, and it is not discussed. There is beef. That is the whole point of the meal, and every person in the barn knows the price of it. It is boiled beef, in quantity, on great dishes, with a knife stuck upright in each one, and there is plum pudding to follow, and bread, and cheese, and beer brought in wooden vessels from the brewhouse. For most of the people sitting at these boards, meat has appeared on the table perhaps once a week through the year, and in small amounts, a piece of bacon cut thin to flavor a dish of potatoes rather than a thing eaten for itself. Here it is cut thick, and there is more of it than a person can finish, and there are children at the end of the table who will remember the sight of the dish more clearly than anything else about the whole year. This is worth slowing down for, because the generosity is real, and it is also doing a job. A supper like this costs the estate a good deal, the beef alone for something over 100 people, with the beer and the puddings and the labor of the women in the farmhouse kitchen who have been at it for 2 days, runs to something in the region of £20, which is more than a day laborer here earns in a year of Mondays. No landowner spends that without a reason, and the reason is stated quite openly in the farming journals of the period, where the harvest home is discussed the way a well-run drainage scheme is discussed, as a thing that returns more than it costs. What it returns is the sense that the estate is a household, not a business with a wage bill, but a household in which the man at the cross table is the head, and everyone else is arranged below him in an order that is natural and permanent and mutual. He feeds you once a year in his own barn, at his own expense, and in exchange the arrangement is confirmed for another 12 months. It is why he stands up at the end and speaks about the season, and about the men who worked it, and about the goodness of Providence in sending fair weather in the 2nd week. And it is why the parson says grace before the beef, and a few words after it, about the laborer being worthy of his hire, which is scripture, and which cuts in a direction nobody in the barn will comment on out loud. None of this makes the beef less good. That is the thing that is easy to get wrong about a scene like this from a distance. The people at these tables are not being deceived. They know precisely what the supper is. They could tell you what it costs, and they eat it with enormous appetite, and enjoy the evening genuinely, and hold both facts at once without difficulty, in the way that people generally can. The speeches are short. The landowner is not a talker, and there is a strong sense in the room that the actual business of the evening begins when he has sat down. Then there is singing. The singing is the oldest part of the whole thing, and the part that is quietly going out. There are harvest songs here that nobody learned from paper, that go verse by verse with the whole barn coming in on the chorus and hammering the boards flat-handed on the beat. And there are men in this room who sing the same 4 songs every September, and have done since they were boys, sitting on a box at the end. Some of them are about the corn and the scythe. Some of them are about drink, frankly, and are sung a good deal more carefully than they were 20 years ago, and 1 or 2 verses that used to be in them are simply not sung any more when the parson is present, which he now always is. That is the change happening in this barn, and it is happening without a word of prohibition. 50 years ago, the harvest home in this county was a rougher and longer business, run largely by the men themselves, with the older customs attached to it, the crowning of a harvest queen, the shouting of the last sheaf, the drinking that went on until people slept in the straw. Respectable opinion has been steadily tidying it since. The parson attends now, the landowner's wife attends, and sits at the cross table in a dark dress, and speaks kindly to the women by name. There is a hymn early in the evening, as well as songs later. The beer is served rather than left standing. The whole occasion has been brought indoors, in every sense, and made into something that can be described approvingly in a county newspaper the following week, and it is described so, and the description is accurate, and something has gone out of it that the older men at the table can feel and cannot name. They will tell you, it was better before. They always do. They are also, in this case, more or less right. You sit through it until close to 11. The lanterns burn down, and the barn gets warmer than the night outside, and the beef is reduced to bone on the dishes, and there is a point somewhere in the middle of the evening when the singing is loud enough that the rooks come off the elms outside, and you notice that your husband, who has said perhaps 40 words all day, is singing with his eyes shut and his hand flat on the board. Then it ends, quite suddenly, the way these things do. The cross table rises. Everybody rises with it. Thanks are given both ways, and mean something in both directions, and the doors are open on the yard, and the cold comes in across the floor. You walk home up the lane with the others, in a loose scattering of people, and the talking dies off within the first quarter mile, because it is late, and tomorrow is Sunday, but Monday is not. The youngest is asleep before you reach the gate at the top, carried against your husband's shoulder with his boots hanging, and the girl is walking on her own, but only just, holding the back of your skirt and putting her feet down carefully, like someone walking on ice. The moon is up over the down. You can see the ricks in the yard behind you, 4 of them, thatched and combed and standing in a line, and they look in that light like something built to be permanent, which they are not, because they will be threshed out through the winter, and by March that yard will be empty ground again. The lane smells of cut grass and cold chalk. Somebody 100 yards ahead is still singing, quietly, one of the ones with a long chorus, and letting it trail off in the middle of the verse, and then picking it up again a little further on. Settling day comes on the Saturday after, in the granary office at the home farm, which is a small square room with a table, a stove that is not lit, and a window that looks out on the yard. The men go in one at a time. There is a queue along the wall, and nobody talks much in it, because the arithmetic each man is carrying in his head is not something he wants to say out loud until he has heard the bailiff's version of it. Your husband has been carrying his for 3 weeks. He has it written on the inside of the tobacco tin lid, in pencil, in the short strokes of a man who was taught figures for 2 winters and no more. Days, half-days, the acres the company took by the piece, the beer stopped, the wheat allowed, at a price below market. You wait outside by the wall with the girl. The bailiff has a ledger with a marbled cover, and he reads out the total, and then reads out the deductions, and then reads out what is left, and he does it in the same voice for every man, which is a kindness of a sort, because it takes the personal out of it. Then the money comes across the table in coin, counted twice, and your husband puts it in the inside pocket and buttons the pocket and comes out into the yard and does not say anything about it until you are past the gate. Here is what it comes to. The month has been a good one. He has earned, across the harvest, something in the region of £4 and 10 shillings, taking the piecework and the day work together, against a regular weekly wage of 11 shillings. You have earned, gathering and binding and then gleaning, a little over £1, and the gleaning itself has put by perhaps 2 bushels of wheat once it is threshed and ground, which is not money, but is flour, and flour is the thing money mostly turns into anyway. Set against a labouring family's year, that is the difference between the 2 halves of the account. Across the 12 months, your husband's regular wage brings in something under £30. The harvest month adds better than 4. It sounds small written down. It is not small. It is the only stretch of the year in which the arithmetic runs the right way, and every family in the lane knows to the shilling what it must do with it before it is earned. So it is spent, most of it, within 3 weeks, and not on anything you would call spending. The rent has been taken at source, which is the estate's arrangement, and not negotiable. What remains goes first to the shop score, which has been running since May, and stands at something over £2. The shopkeeper knows harvest is coming as well as you do, which is why the score was allowed to run at all. You pay it down, not off, because a score entirely cleared is a credit line closed, and you will want it again in February. Then boots, 2 pairs, 1 for your husband and 1 for the boy, because the boy has been going through the summer in what was left of last year's, and there is no getting another winter out of them. Boots for a working man cost something in the region of 12 shillings, and are expected to last 2 years with mending, and the mending is a further cost, paid in pence at the cobbler's cottage at the bottom of the village. Then cloth. You buy stout wool at the market at Devizes, enough for a coat for the boy, cut down from a man's pattern, and flannel for underclothing, and you will make all of it yourself across September and October by candlelight after the children are down. The cloth costs perhaps 18 shillings. Made up in a shop, it would cost 3 times that, which is a saving you never see written anywhere, but which is real, and is yours, and is a piece of household economics of the kind that never enters a wage table. Then the winter store. A sack of potatoes off the allotment ground is already in, but you buy what will keep: salt, a piece of bacon to hang, sugar, tea, which is dear and which you buy in quarter pounds, coal or wood, depending on what the estate allows in the way of fallen timber that year, candles. And then, if there is anything left, and there is this year, something is put by, not in a bank. There is no bank a family like yours uses. It goes in a tin, on the high shelf, behind the tea, and it amounts to perhaps 15 shillings, and it is against the day when somebody is ill for a fortnight, and no wage comes in at all. That is the harvest. 4 weeks of 16-hour days, converted into boots, flannel, a paid-down debt, and 15 shillings in a tin. From the top of the lane in the last week of September, you can see what is coming, and it is not a mystery to you, because it is the same every year. The days shorten fast on the chalk. By the end of October, the men are out at 7:30 instead of 4, and in from the fields by 5, and the work has changed entirely in character. Harvest work is hard and paid and finite. Winter work is hard and poorly paid and endless. There is hedging and ditching, which is cold, wet, standing work in the bottom of a ditch with a bill hook, and which pays the plain weekly wage with nothing added. There is threshing in the barn, or by the travelling steam engine that comes round the parish, and does in 3 days what used to take 3 men all winter with flails, which is faster, and which has taken away the one indoor, wage-paying job that used to fill the dead months. There is muck carting. There is nothing at all, some weeks, if the ground is frozen too hard to work, and a man stood off for frost, is a man not paid for frost. So the winter runs the account backwards. The tin on the shelf goes down. The score at the shop goes up again from about January, and by May you are where you were last May, which is the reason the harvest is not a festival, whatever the song says, and never was. Now here is the thing that should be said plainly, at the end, before the light goes. Everything you did this month required skill, not effort, which is a different thing, and cheaper. Skill. You made a band out of standing straw, with 2 twists of your wrists, faster than you could think about it, and you made it hold. You judged the weight of a sheaf, so that it stood in the shock, and did not fall, and you judged the lean of the shock, so that the rain ran off it, and you were right, and being right is the whole difference between grain that is worth 10 shillings a bushel and grain that is worth nothing because it sprouted in the ear. You knew, walking up to a field, in the first 10 seconds, whether it was fit to cut. You knew which of the extra hands would keep the pace and which would fall behind by 3 o'clock, and you arranged where your children stood accordingly. You fed 5 people for 4 weeks of the heaviest work in the farming year on a budget that would not have kept a gentleman's dog, and nobody was ill and nobody went short, and you did that by an accumulated knowledge of price, season, keeping, and substitution that no one ever taught you formally and no one ever wrote down. None of that is anywhere in the ledger with the marbled cover. What is in the ledger is acres. Acres cut, acres carried, ricks built, bushels off the field, the estate's accounts, which are careful accounts, kept by careful men, record the yield of the top field to the fraction of a bushel, and record the labor that produced it as a lump sum against a category. Your name is in that book once, if at all, at a rate fixed lower than a man's, for reasons that have nothing to do with what you cut, or how fast you bound it, and which nobody in the county thought to justify, because nobody in the county thought it required justifying. That is not a fact about your husband, who worked beside you and knew exactly what you were worth. It is not a fact about the bailiff, who was decent enough. It is a fact about the shape of the thing, and the shape did not need anybody in particular to be unkind in order to work the way it worked. Both things are true at once, and you should hold both. You were good at this. You were, in a real and demonstrable sense, one of the people the whole month depended on, and the arrangement you lived inside was built to record the acre and the rick, which can be sold, and not the hands, which cannot, and which are simply assumed to be there again next August, and the August after that. The cottage is quiet now. The children are down. The fire is banked for the night, with the last of the ash drawn over it. On the shelf by the door is the harvest bottle, the stone one with the wooden stopper that went out to the field every morning for 4 weeks and came back empty every night. You washed it out this afternoon with cold water and a handful of sand, and rinsed it, and stood it upside down on the sill until the light went, and now it is dry and right way up and back in its place at the end of the shelf where it will sit, untouched, for 11 months. Outside, the wind has got up a little and is moving in the elms at the top of the lane. And that is all. The bottle on the shelf, the fire banked, the room going dark by degrees and quiet and staying that way.